Hopefully everybody can hear us okay. We appreciate your attendance into our job talk and resume workshop. We've conducted one of these in the past, and backed by popular demand, we're going to try and cover again on resumes and tips in the market to help secure a job. So with me, Katie Cole, one of our senior recruiters, has agreed to join me for this. It's intended to be interactive. So as always, for the purpose of the presentation, please make sure you have your mute button on. When we get to the question and answer phase, please unmute the call and feel free to interject. You can always chat us in the box up top, or the chat box up top. We'll try and answer those questions online while we're moving through this presentation as well. As I said before, my name is Matt Peale. I'm one of the partners here at Impact Business Group. Katie Cole, one of our senior recruiters, is here to help as well. Katie, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited.
As I said, our agenda is simply to cover what employers are looking for in a resume from our seat, what you should and shouldn't do, and what you shouldn't and should not include in that resume. Some red flags to avoid, formatting, and common themes. I know throughout this registration process, you folks had kicked back some questions for us, so we want to make sure we try and answer as many of those as we can. We grouped them into common themes, and hopefully in one of those buckets we'll answer the question that you'd submitted. And as I said in the onset, the Q&A at the end, feel free to ask questions. It's intended to be interactive and situational, so if you have a question, either chat it or unmute the call and hit us. For those that are familiar with Impact Business Group, we're primarily in the IT, engineering, accounting, finance space. We've got a shared services group which covers legal, customer service, human resources, marketing. Feel free to find us at www.impactbusinessgroup.com. You'll see a list of our postings are out there, blog, and this content. We certainly work from a client's perspective, and hence the reason for laying out some of these recommendations that hopefully we'll share with you from our clients' end standpoint of what they look for in the resume. Locations here in Tampa, and as I said, any questions, please just feel free to unmute your call and ask. With that said, I'd like to kick it off with what employers are looking for in a resume. Katie, you've got a number of years' experience in this area. Can you share a little bit of insight from that standpoint?
Yeah, so as our funny comic says, they could limit the page from 17,000 pages down to 3. So I think that's just a good way to kind of sum up that a hiring manager isn't going to go through, every single detail of a resume. So all employers are looking for the ideal candidate, but most importantly, they're looking for compensation alignment, industry alignment, does your role or your background align, and then more so once they get into the interview process, are you a cultural fit for the company? So being able to detail specifics of what you've accomplished and outline that with specific numbers and prove your track record, I think is, so we'll get into that more in depth in the next few slides. So a few things of what you should include in the resume is really just standard things that you've heard in the past. You want to make sure that you are including the month and the year of your employment. So that's something we see often that can be kind of tricky for a hiring manager to read when the dates of employment only show from which year to which year. Putting the month along with that year of employment is very helpful. Being able to include title changes during your term of employment and being able to show progression in your career is really great. Another thing is being able to outline accomplishments again. So instead of just listing out your job duties and making your resume just kind of reflect like a job description, being able to show I accomplished X by doing Y, which resulted in Z. That's kind of the gold standard of how you should outline an accomplishment, by showing what you did, how you did it, and what impact that had on the company.
And just to elaborate on that, a lot of our clients call it the STAR methodology.
Right.
As you walk through your accomplishments, make sure you're applying the acronym of STAR. What was the situation? What was the specific task? The actions. What specific actions were you responsible for? And then the R for results. Specific results on those particular projects that you were assigned to or part of a team. So an easy rule of thumb to build those accomplishments, use that STAR methodology.
Let's click. There we go. What you should not include in a resume. So these are things that we see often, things that can be preclusive to excluding you from the process. Sometimes it could be as simple as including a photo. In other countries, it's a little bit more customary to include that. Sometimes it's even required, I think, in some countries. Here in the United States, sometimes employers can be turned off to that just because it's not the standard process. Some companies have an obligation to exclude candidates if they submit a photo, even if it's a good photo, even if it's a bad photo, no matter what. So that's something I would urge you not to include. Anything that's not pertinent to the job. You don't need to put that on. You know, if you have a CPR certification from when you were in high school, but you're a senior level candidate, you don't need to include that. Something that we do really find important is considering a professional summary in lieu of an objective statement. And that just kind of opens up the job search so that you're not precluding yourself from any opportunities just because they don't hit that specific objective that you are including in your resume. So those are a couple things that you would exclude from the resume. And bouncing off of that, a cover letter, if it's required, 3 short paragraphs would kind of do the trick. But again, cover letters, some companies will ask in their job description, please include a cover letter. In that case, of course, you want to do it, but sometimes it's good to include, but they're not always something that's read, so we don't always urge our candidates to include those. Don't try to fit all of your experience into one page. So unless you're a recent grad where you don't have tons of experience, we see it often where candidates might have like 15 years of experience, and you can tell that they're just trying to condense it into one little page. They're stretching the margins, they're shrinking the font. And really, you're just doing yourself a disservice by not putting all of that great information and all those great accomplishments onto a resume. You don't want to have those 17,000 pages of a resume like we saw in the comic. However, 2-3 pages, if you have that much experience, if you're a senior level candidate, you want to expand on those, and you don't want to just limit the experience that you have. So it's a little bit of a dated standard to say your resume needs to be one page no matter what. So we're kind of moving away from that. But again, if you don't have a lot of experience, you can get it onto one page, great. Again, if you're a recent grad, you can include vocational training, you can include internships, you should include internships. Sometimes you can include related classwork for your targeted jobs. Specifically, I see that work in engineering types of roles. So those are a couple things that you can definitely include.
Yeah, same thing on the IT side. Any clubs, associations that you're attached to that provide, a forum for sharing of information, think tanks, if you will, within that specific discipline. It could be IT, engineering, or CPA group, or finance audit group. You definitely want to include those if they're relevant to that target area you're searching.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the red flags to avoid. So these sound like very no-brainer things. Obviously, you're not going to submit a resume with spelling errors or grammatical errors, but it does happen. So I've worked with candidates that are high level, that are great candidates, and just let them know, hey, there's a little error on here, and they have no clue. So one way to avoid this is have a friend proofread it, have a family member proofread it, because when you're staring at the same document over and over and over, days or weeks at a time, it's kind of challenging to catch some of those errors. So either putting it down for a short period of time and coming back to it, or just passing it over to someone to proofread is a really good way to just avoid having any types of errors in the resume. Something that we really urge our candidates not to do is omit employment dates. So this can really become a red flag for an employer if maybe you're sitting in the interview and you're saying, oh, I actually worked for that company. And they're like looking at the resume like where because it's not included. So it can be considered a little bit of a red flag. So even if you were at an employer for what you deem a short period of time, you still want to be, truthful and you still want to put it on your resume. If you've had any gaps of employment, you can explain that in a brief one-sentence statement. If it's, stay-at-home parent, how would you cover like a gap?
Yeah,
there's a few varieties.
Yeah, you can certainly put your date time stamp in there that's related or attending to household needs or ailing parents or a family member. And I think it's totally prudent to include that gap. You just don't want that gap to be left open to the person reading it for interpretation, saying, are you in sabbatical? Are you traveling the world? Are you, or even worst case scenario, right, in some other capacity? So definitely include that gap so there's no chronological break in that resume.
Yep, absolutely. And again, we kind of covered leaving off employment or employers. So in formatting, that's, again, one of the biggest pieces with writing a resume. So again, from the seat we sit and viewing several hundreds of resumes on a daily or weekly basis, the most appealing resume to a hiring manager, to a recruiter, whoever it might be, HR, is a resume that's simply formatted and easy to read. So if you go online and you're looking at templates, you might get drawn away by resumes that are flashy and have graphics all over and graphs I've seen on resumes. But really, the gold standard of a resume is something that easily outlines your name, your contact info. I've had resumes that they forgot to put their phone number, their email. So make sure your name is visible. You don't need it, size 100 font, but you want it big. You want your contact information right at the top along with it. And again, a professional summary. And that can be a way to just kind of outline some of your soft skills so that you're not outlining those soft skills within a skill section of a resume, but you can say motivated, driven, technical engineer, or be creative with that summary, and you can kind of have some leeway to give the reader some insight on you as a person. And again, outlining it very clean and simply, where there's an education section, and outlining, do you have your degree? What year did you finish that? What degrees or what certifications or technical trainings do you have? Including all of that, and including dates on those is very helpful. If you have a certification that's expired, I have had candidates, put that on the resume and put expired. So, sometimes that can at least be helpful to show that you've done it in the past and can get that certification in the future, versus being, just a little bit more gray area where they have, maybe a PMP certification, but when you talk to them on the phone, they let you know, oh, that's actually expired. So being straightforward about that ahead of time is very helpful. And again, listing those skills out. What types of hardware or software skills do you have? What have you had exposure to? Experience, listing that out in chronological order, making sure you have maybe a line to tell your reader about your employer. A lot of the time, a recruiter might not know if let's say they're looking for a candidate, and I'm speaking more of like the engineering resumes that I see, but if I'm looking for a candidate with a plastic injection molding background and I receive a resume that says, worked at X manufacturing company, and right below that, they have a one-line sentence that says, plastic injection molding company producing parts for whatever, and the size of the company. And that makes me as a reader very quick to call that candidate because that's exactly what I'm looking for. So even if I'm not familiar with that employer, I know going in. So those are things that are good to include.
Yeah, it's a valid point, right? We often make assumptions when we list our employment history that because I'm familiar with who Impact Business Group is, that every reader must know who they are.
Right.
And the reality is they don't. So it's helpful to include overall company size so the reader can get a breadth of experience and size of environment you're coming from in hopes that there's similarities there.
Yep. And really, again, on the formatting, I mostly talked about what's important to include in the resume, but again, I'm going back to really quickly just keeping it clean, having your name, having the summary, work experience, having that in bold, and then having each job and the date listed on the right-hand side so that it's very easy to read if you've had multiple job titles at the same company. Putting the company and then putting the dates, let's say you were there from 2000 to 2019, and then you can have the job title, and then you can have the dates that you were at each specific job. And that way they can see that you were at one company for 19 years. But then you held these roles, and this is how quickly you were able to progress. So those are things that it's a little bit harder to just kind of speak at you about, but hopefully that gives you an insight into how you can format the resume so it's easy to read at a glance.
And I know the formatting, Katie, is a really, really broad topic. For you folks online, is there any questions before we head to the next screen about formatting? What we're hoping to accomplish, if you follow the quick bullet that we've laid out here, generally speaking, you'll develop a resume in the appropriate length and content to help you get recognized.
Yeah, and we can also hit those questions at the end too if they're not thrown in. But we did take all the resumes, or some of the resumes that came in that were submitted with questions, and really they all kind of boiled down to these common themes that we included. Are we getting a question?
We are.
All right, let's read that.
And the question that just popped in it says, is it better to have conversational language in the sections or bullet points?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my advice is the easiest, again, coming back to what's the easiest resume to read, bullet points are definitely easier to read. So maybe if you are someone who's very senior, or you are in maybe let's say a really unique role that's kind of hard to explain quickly on a resume, you could have maybe 2 or 3 sentence max, just kind of more conversational, but then get those, really what you did on a day-to-day in bullet point form, and then you can also have a title that says accomplishments, and then list, again, whatever you can quantify or qualify under those accomplishments. What's your take on that, Matt?
I agree, and it's the answer is both, right?
Yeah,
we're getting to both, and I would push back to the person that just asked the question to apply the STAR methodology. Put it in bullet format, but apply that STAR methodology for each one of your accomplishments, and you're going to get a combination of both.
Yeah.
Both themes or project overview as well as the technical specifications.
Right.
Or accomplishments.
I do want to add and qualify that it depends on the level also, right? So if you are a recent grad and maybe you had, I'm just taking on this job, an administrative assistant role, if you had more of like a role that was involved in several facets of a company and maybe the role was a little bit more hard to explain, then I would say have a few sentences kind of maybe more conversational. But if it's more of a straight to the point type of role, I think bullet points would suffice. So again, it's a little bit hard to say for exactly, like every resume is going to look like this. Every resume is going to look like that. Hopefully that makes sense. So these are the common themes. Appropriate length, and we kind of touched on this, and Matt's a big proponent of you don't need to follow that one-page resume, criteria that we've kind of heard about. I know I heard about it in college and high school. However, some of the questions we had were candidates having too much work history list, how many years back should he or she go on a resume with 19 plus years at his current employer. So do you want to tackle this? Or?
Yeah. From my standpoint, right, if it's a recent college grad and you don't have very much to speak about, it's going to be one-page max because you're going to talk about, your relevant coursework, maybe an internship. You just don't have the depth to speak of. With the question that was submitted for somebody that has 19 plus years, it's completely prudent and acceptable that resume is 4 pages. Should it go 5 or greater? No. Can it go 4 or less? Yes. In today's market, people are doing more with less. In other words, the human resources team is so overwhelmed with resumes, they're sending them on to the hiring manager. They're reading these documents, and that person wants to see more information, specifically what you've been doing. So I know it sounds like a moving target or a large goalpost here, but college grad, 1 year of experience or less, 1 page, 4 pages for somebody that's 20 plus.
Right. And the only thing that I would add to that is, let's say you are let's say now you're a senior professional in whatever industry, and you don't need to include those like lower level college jobs or anything that's no longer relevant. So if you're really trying to cut back, that's really the only area I would say it's appropriate to omit jobs. If it's just 15, 20 years back and it's just not relevant. Do we have another question filtered in?
No, it was just a thank you. And you're welcome.
Good. Chronological order, skipping around. So some of the questions, should you always put them in chronological order, or can you skip around the unimportant ones? How to cover the multiple projects that I worked on as a project manager. So that's a great question. And that's when typically the gold standard we say is chronological order is best. That way the reader can easily just see where you've been, how your career has progressed. I have seen candidates successfully navigate away from that. However, it's a little bit more difficult to read a resume. So there's a couple ways to do this, and I'll try to be as straight to the point as possible. But if you had worked on multiple projects as a project manager, I'm not sure if the question is referring to with contracts or with the same company. If it's the same company, then keep that in chronological order, and then you can outline maybe like the projects that you've worked on in bullet point form, and then list accomplishments under those. No doubt, more of a subset of that project management role. What specific projects did you work on, and what were those specific accomplishments within each one of those projects? And along those same lines, somebody just sent a message in saying, well, what if I have a 3-month gap where I've been trying to find a position? And that's okay. Let there be that break in the resume that says, my last project or role ended in June 15th of 2019, and today you're still looking for a job. They're going to ask that question of you, and whatever that gap is, then explain it, right? Laid off, or I'm trying to find a new position, right? We're not encouraging you to put in, June 16th, 2019 to present, looking for a job. That's not what we're trying to say in that aspect. If you weren't doing anything in that 3-month period, great. We have other people that have been part of mergers and acquisitions that have sat out for 18 months. And in a longer stint like that, they typically will put, what they've been doing, which means for them it's part of a merger and acquisition, and their non-compete precluded them from working or something along those lines. Yeah, so. And absolutely. That's when it's really helpful to list so whoever's reading it easily understands it. And then the other thing we kind of filtered some of these questions into was frequent contract stints and how to appropriately list those on a resume. So how do you incorporate when you do freelance work and contract work? When you have a lot of contract employment, how should it be listed? So those are really great questions, and you can read through those specific questions. But one way, let's say, I think one of the questions was separating. Let's say you worked full-time direct hire for several years, and then for whatever reason, the last 2 years you just worked contract jobs. You can list, kind of like as a job title, say contract consulting positions, and then list the years, so 2018, 2019. And then underneath that, list the company that you were working at and the contracting agency that you were contracted through, and then, list the job duties as in bullet point form, just like you would regularly, and make sure you include the month and the year, 2 months and year that you were employed there, and then do that for all the contract jobs you were at. But make sure that you're being very clear that those were contract positions. so that when someone's reading your resume, they're able to say, oh, they worked on a project that was probably 6 months or 3 months or 1 year, and that's why they moved on to the other role. And it just helps a reader know that you're not just hopping around, you're not just spending 3 months at one company and then going to another company. And it just makes it a lot easier to read when it's formatted correctly. So I don't think that's something that you need to be fearful of. As long as you're listing it out correctly, it shouldn't impact you negatively. Anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think it goes hand in hand with bullet number 2 on this common themes is list them as projects. And, we talked about the project manager having multiple projects. The same holds true here. As a contract worker or a project worker, as Katie said, list out the date, time, contract role, what client, what company you're at, what industry, et cetera. Again, to give that reader some perspective on what you were doing. But list them as subsets of a particular project or assignment if you want to use the word assignment.
The other theme, changing fields or industries. So let's say you, in this particular question, how can I write a resume targeted towards a designer and developer and social media manager? I want to reinvent myself after 30 years in IoT and e-commerce management. So that's a loaded question, and there's a lot more than just the resume that kind of can go into answering that. But one way to kind of help reinvent yourself or target that on a resume is, again, a summary, or in this case, an objective statement where you can say, looking for an opportunity to utilize my skills earned or skills gained in e-commerce management, and looking to transition into a designer or a social media manager type of role. That way, and of course, you want to be a little bit more eloquent than that and kind of take some thought into writing that summary or that objective statement, but you want to use that as a way to tell your reader, like, I know I've done this, but now I want to do this, and here's how I have the skills to do this. So if you're looking to make a transition like that, I'm sure there's ways that your background would align to tackling social media or design work, but maybe it's as simple as classes or taking certifications in whatever you're looking to be a part of next. That way you actually can say, I have this skill set for this job, even though my background doesn't align completely. So that's the way you can kind of give yourself a leg up on top of writing a great summary statement. And I think, again, making a transition like that, leverage your network, and we'll talk about this in the next slide a little bit more, but if there's a way you can kind of get a foot in the door opportunity, or if you can start an opportunity on contract to just gain some experience, I think that's a really great way to kind of just reinvent yourself and get into something that is completely new.
And segueing into that, one of the questions that just came in from an IT professional is, what sites can I go to? And the question's prudent, right? The answer for an IT professional is not the same for an engineering, manufacturing engineering person or an accounting finance. But for that IT person, certainly DICE is geared more towards IT folks. Certainly LinkedIn, I think, is all-encompassing for everybody, but also Indeed and Monster are two good sources as well to take a look at when looking for a new IT role.
Yep, absolutely. And even on LinkedIn, you can say that you're open to new opportunities, and then recruiters would be more likely to contact you as well. So getting on to our other themes, we've touched on this a tiny bit about undergraduate, recent graduate resume writing, what to avoid in that type of resume. I feel like I was there not very long ago. So my advice, if you're still in college, get internships. That's the number one thing that makes a recent grad stand out. So I would say there's usually like two types of recent grad types of resumes that we see. One is they have a co-op or they've had tons of internship experience, and that's great. That's the ideal resume, really. And if that's the case, if you've had several internships or you've completed a co-op, you don't necessarily need to put your, subway on there because you have enough work experience that's relative to the job you're applying to that you don't necessarily need to list that. You can, that's when you kind of have more to talk about. If you don't have any relative internship experience and you worked through college or you've been a part of organizations, you really want to make sure you list that and list anything that would correlate towards getting you into the job market. So another thing that, again, if you're looking to kind of get your foot in the door, and let's say you're open to relocation because you need that opportunity, you can put that in your summary statement so that when you're applying to jobs out of state, on the other side of the state, recruiters are more likely to call you because they see you are indeed open to relocation. So I think just covering that in the summary statement is helpful, because if I get a resume from someone in Florida, I've gotten resumes where I thought this job was in Florida, or I thought this job was remote. So just being able to clear that up if you are open to relocation is helpful. But listing organizations that you've been a part of, making sure your resume looks good, is clean, it is going to help you. But, really it's more of a task to get internships and get experience that is going to be relative to your job search. Demonstrating longevity and addressing resume gaps in a resume, we kind of touched on that a tiny bit, but this is something that we see often, and I think it is really helpful when a candidate kind of covers this up on a resume. Sometimes they'll say this company closed down, or you know that they weren't fired from a resume. You don't always need to go that far, but we'll read some of these questions. So most of my 30-plus year career was working for one company, which I left on good terms 4 years ago for a relocation and new industry. I've been employed with 4 other companies since then. How can I demonstrate longevity and reliability in my resume? It sounds like you're, in this case, candidate's case, are probably already doing that. So, you have to put the information on the resume as it is. And again, I think some of these questions, I haven't stayed at a job for more than 1 to 2 years. Does this look bad on my resume? The short answer is probably yes. However, how can we kind of tackle this? And again, your resume is your resume, and you need to put those companies and the dates on there correctly. However, I guess this is less of a resume question and more of a job search or process question. So, I sympathize with candidates who are maybe in a bad situation, or they've left companies for very valid reasons. But as you look for a job and you're maybe going through the interview process and something doesn't feel right, or if it doesn't check all those boxes of what you're looking for to be at long term, you really need to ask yourself if it's worth making a move. And again, I know we're getting a little bit off topic here, but I think that's the number one way to make sure that you're not just constantly hopping around to different companies, and you're able to not have those resume gaps or those frequent job hops on your resume. So how do we get past that? I think it's really just finding something that is the right fit and is going to be where you're going to be at long term. We kind of talked a little bit about how to address a job gap. So one way you can do that is if you were taking care of a family member that was ill, if you were taking a sabbatical, that's something I've seen on a resume, listing it out. I don't necessarily think you need to do a cover letter unless it's required or asked for, but that's something you're going to want to be prepared to talk about in an interview.
Trust the fact that if the interviewee has a question that he or she's going to ask, you're not going to be able to proactively address everybody's concern of what they see on your resume. It's a writing exercise. It's a one-dimensional exercise. It doesn't represent a multifaceted human being. So these are meant to serve as guidelines, not absolutes.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
The biggest thing that I see, and you do too, is folks that are contacting us for help are saying, "I'm not getting callbacks," and how do I accomplish that, and how do I get interviews or advance myself to the next step? And the biggest thing for me is LinkedIn, and to leverage the people you know of at that particular organization to help you. We were just in a meeting this morning talking about an individual that on the outside, their qualifications did not meet any facet of the position we were searching on, but they were in fact attached to somebody via LinkedIn within that hiring organization, and they were referred on and hired on the spot. And even though their background, as you looked at their resume, did not align. So if you're not getting the callbacks, you're not getting the traction, make sure you leverage LinkedIn to try and find former colleagues that can advocate on your behalf from the inside.
Yep, absolutely. And that really hits on the final two themes that we had. But again, on not getting any callbacks, my advice is to look at job descriptions that you're applying for, and either think about keywords and put those into your resume if you do have experience with those things, and that way you're getting more traction that way, because you look like you're aligned better by using a job description and kind of working your resume off of it in a way, or just really evaluating, are you applying for jobs that you're qualified for? So sometimes, we get candidates often that are applying for jobs that they're nowhere near qualified for. So really taking more time through the process and, going through each job description a little bit more closely, and doing a broader search and opening up your search terms for jobs that you're searching for can be helpful. And as Matt said, leveraging your LinkedIn network, sending out messages to a hiring manager, and kind of using that as a way to control the process. So my hope for any candidates who's maybe feeling discouraged by the process, where they feel like they're submitting their resume into this black hole and never hearing back, is using this as a way and using LinkedIn as a tool to really control the process and actually feel like you're working towards something. That doesn't mean calling every company that you applied to and asking if they received your resume. That's not really the appropriate way to do things, but using LinkedIn, trying to figure out who's the decision maker here. Is it the HR manager, or is it the prospective manager of the role that you're applying to? And I think you're going to get a lot further that way if you're not having success. So, and I think that kind of hits resume writing for the new decade. Keywords. I kind of talked about going to the job description that you're applying to and pulling keywords off of that. If you have experience with a variety of systems like SAP, Oracle, those are things that you can put into a skills section of a resume to make it pull higher in, a search. If someone's searching resumes off of like Monster or Career Builder, if you're in a position maybe where you're not working or you don't need to be concerned with your employer finding your resume, you can post your resume online. You can put it on your LinkedIn profile. You can put it on Monster, Career Builder, Indeed, and that way recruiters are going to see you and they're going to be reaching out to you, and it's going to make the process a little bit easier. That way you don't have to apply. They're knocking on your door. So those are definitely things that are becoming more popular and I think are super helpful. So, oops, I went too far. Go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. I was just going to say, I know we've covered a ton of content as we always do, trying to cram all this information into a quick 38-minute webinar, but we're going to email this recording out for everybody, hit all of our social networking resources on this. I think we're going to also take this and reproduce it as a podcast so people can listen to it down the road. You can view our talent showcase at talent.impactbusinessgroup.com. Encourage you to follow us on the newsletter with more tips and information on how to help build a resume. As always, we're pretty responsive with your tweets, your comments. You can connect with us either way. The other thing I'll say is there's a related article to what we were covering today that was just out on MLive's business section today. Regarding resumes and the person transforming themselves in today's job market. So some additional helpful tips and information online on MLive. So don't be afraid to look at that. With that said, this is time to turn it over to you folks. If there's any questions, if we skipped over one of your questions, or if I didn't answer something you may have messaged us on, please feel free to unmute and ask away.
I have a question. So as a more experienced worker, it's hard to find a job because of my age, first of all. And second of all, I have quite a few gaps. Back in 2008, especially when the economy crashed, I was living in northern Indiana in Podunkville, And I was unemployed for a long time looking for a job. How do you address that gap? You just say unemployed looking for a job. I mean, that sounds crappy. I don't want to put that on my resume.
Yeah, you're going to have to address that either way, right? If you leave that gap off, you're going to address that gap during the face-to-face interview or the phone interview. So you can either put that gap on the resume or be prepared to field the question, which is, you just answered it, right? I was exploring opportunities between this time period. And that's okay, right? As it pertains to your tenure or years of experience, I'm a seasoned person. I would challenge this theory all day long. I think it's more difficult for the junior entry-level people to find new jobs than it is, you know, us folks more on the seasoned side, because most employers, I can't think of very many that don't subscribe to, I need more experience, I need industry experience, I need functional expertise, and I need technical expertise. So if your resume doesn't represent that, meaning what industries you've come out, leverage those. What size of organizations, what your functional and technical roles will be. I think if you're addressing those items or those experiences in your resume, your success rate will go through the roof.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, I got one more that just came through online. Should I put the year of my graduation from college? It was in 1983. The answer is yes, right? Because if you leave it blank, the person reading the resume is automatically going to look at that and start making negative assumptions. Does this mean this person didn't complete their degree? Does this mean this person, started and dropped out? What happened here? So, again, my answer is similar to the before. Your years of experience is a positive in today's industry. 22 and a half years ago, I would say to you, your seasoning or experience in the workforce would have been a detriment, but the pendulum has swung so far the other way that don't subscribe to the mentality of we're too old, you're too old. That's just not the case in today's world. Last question that came through is it worthwhile to hire a professional resume writer? Obviously, with the amount of experience Katie and I have and sitting here and laughing, not a bad way, but really saying, I don't think you need to. If you look at the article I referenced on MLive, if you hit the high-level bullets that we covered today, and if you expand your resume using that STAR methodology, I think you'll find yourself having greater success. Mm-hmm. With that said, I don't have anything statistically or fact-based to say your success rate having a professional resume writer is greater than that of that which is yielding this free advice to you. Mm-hmm. For me, I would try this free advice first, and hopefully with our 20-plus years of experience of doing this, it will yield the results you need.
And I'm laughing because I always feel like I'm a resume writer for my candidates sometimes, but if you want to send in your resume directly, we can try and help you steer you in the right
Absolutely.
direction. But yeah, I think with all the tools online, formatting and templates, it's just not necessarily a requirement for you to work through a professional. Yeah, any other questions? All right.
Excellent. We appreciate your time. Like I said, we'll make sure we stand this up on our podcast. Feel free to follow this content on our YouTube channel. It'll be posted there as well. And we thank you for your time and hope you found some beneficial information.
Yeah.